Okay, good morning or afternoon, depending upon where you're located. Welcome to today's Production Pulse, titled Continuous Improvement to the Rescue in 2025. I'm Jill Jusko. I'm Executive Editor for IndustryWeek, and joining me today are three individuals with a deep knowledge in the area of continuous improvement, and we're so pleased that they are joining us this afternoon. We have with us Katie Anderson. She's a leadership consultant, a speaker, a learning enthusiast. She's the author of Learning to Lead, Learning to Learn, as well as a regular IndustryWeek contributor. Joining Katie is John Dyer, author of the Façade of Excellence, Defining a New Normal of Leadership. He's a frequent speaker on topics of leadership, on continuous improvement, and teamwork, on culture change. I've known John and worked with him for many years, and I'm pleased he's with us. And also joining us, I'd like to welcome Michael Bremer. Michael is the author of How to Do a Gemba Walk and Learn to See the Invisible, long-time continuous improvement speaker, very knowledgeable on the topic, and it's great to have you with us as well, Michael. Before we move into the Q&A, I want to set the stage just a little bit. I think it's fair to say that manufacturers are facing turbulent times on a lot of fronts: supply chain constraints, trade issues, a worker shortage, new technologies easing some processes and complicating others, and those are just a few. And if there ever were a time for continuous improvement to shine, it seems like now is that time. We know that developing a workforce that is firmly focused on continuous improvement leads to engaged employees and a problem-solving culture, which are, of course, the building blocks of operational excellence. And what we're here to do today is discuss the ideas and methods to boost your continuous improvement methods as we move through 2025 and beyond. If you have any questions for our speakers and you're on LinkedIn, please type the question in the space provided, and we will try to get to it in the short time we have. So I am going to get started with Katie. Katie, earlier this month, you wrote an article on IndustryWeek titled The Real Meaning of Kaizen. And one of the points you make early on in that article is too many organizations don't fully understand what Kaizen is, or at the very least have a very restricted view of it. Can you walk us through your definition of Kaizen and how you feel it should be practiced?
Well, absolutely. The first time I got introduced to the word Kaizen was almost 20 years ago at the beginning of my continuous improvement journey when I was working in hospital and healthcare systems. And at that time, Kaizen was really associated for me as, an event or something you do, like a week-long Kaizen event. And the concept of Kaizen can be applied to event, but there's a deeper meaning. And 10 years ago, I moved to Japan, which is where I met Mr. Isao Yoshino, who's a Toyota leader, and I've written my book, Learning to Lead, Leading to Learn, about him. And I got very interested in what Kaizen really means in the Japanese culture. It's not only about daily continuous improvement, continuous improvement is typically what the word Kaizen is translated to in English. But when I learned the Japanese, the origin of the word and the way it's written, it comes from symbols meaning self in whip, and then change for the good. And so it's really about having the self-discipline first and foremost to make changes for yourself so that you can make changes for the good. It's about having, Kaizen's not something you delegate to other people or just an event you do. It's a mindset and a way of thinking about continuous improvement for yourself, for process, and then how do we make collective good each and every day. And so really we need to move away from seeing Kaizen as something that we do, but Kaizen is something that we live. And it also requires us to take a look at ourselves as leaders. And I know we're going to talk about this here today, that to create a continuous improvement and problem-solving culture in our organizations, it requires us to shift our behaviors and have that self-discipline to make the changes needed to really create that effective continuous improvement culture.
Okay, great. We will come back and talk more about what specifically you can do. I'm going to jump over to John. And John, as I mentioned earlier, the time is right to ramp up continuous improvement efforts in 2025. It seems, given our twin issues of uncertainty and well-defined problems with things like a labor shortage. I guess the question is, I made that as a statement, but do you agree with that statement? And if you do agree with that statement, how do you start? How would you start addressing that in 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have a lot of turmoil ahead of us for a number of reasons, right? I mean, like we've mentioned just this week, the big discussion and debate is how tariffs are going to impact the economic flow of goods all around the world. And there may be a strong desire for more U.S. manufacturers to start bringing more business or more work into the U.S. The problem with that is that, we're already experiencing labor shortages, especially as it relates to the skilled labors, machinists and welders and even good assemblers and people who can run robotics. So I think there's going to be a real need to develop our workforce to a higher level than it's ever been before, and to improve our systems so that we can get the most capacity out of our systems than we've ever done before. So as far as where to start, again, I think it starts with the leaders of an organization to sit down and together, develop a strategy that's going to say, all right, how do we change the way we do things? How do we change the culture? How do we change our leadership approach? How do we spend more time out on the factory floor? And I'm sure Michael's going to talk more about that, going to the Gemba. And how do we start shifting? I think this will be something we can talk more about later on, but how do we start shifting the leader's mindset from one of managing to one of coaching? I think we need to start using the word coaching more and more as we go down this path of continuous improvement.
If I could just complement that just a little bit, both John and Katie talked about mindset and learning and coaching. And one of the big challenges is that getting a deep understanding of what highly effective improvement practices looks like takes a very long time, a frustratingly long time. I mean, I'm an old guy and I am still learning, new things as I do this, as I work with people like John and Katie, and I benefit from other experiences that it is that they've had. And so that whole idea of showing some vulnerability where you're willing to admit that you don't know, but even more importantly, that you're approaching all of this, and I know we're going to come to this word again later, you're approaching all of this in the spirit of learning. Because to me, at the end of the day, it's all about this willingness to learn, and I don't know it all. And there's refinements that I can get a deeper and deeper understanding of it as time goes by. And so to improve that, my ability to coach that John was talking about, I really need to be working pretty actively to increase my knowledge base so that if I could stay even or maybe one step ahead of the people that it is that I'm trying to coach as we're moving along and trying to progress.
Michael, and this is something that I talk quite a bit about, is that I totally 100% agree with what you just said. But think about how the current system is set up in most organizations as far as promoting and hiring people. They don't tend to promote and hire people who are willing to admit that they don't know everything, right? Because that in the U.S. especially, that's a sign of vulnerability. That's a sign of weakness. And
right.
if I'm considering someone for an executive position or some, high paid management role, the natural inclination is, hey, I want to hire someone who is overly confident, that doesn't admit that they need to learn new things, that does everything themselves, solves all the problems, tells people what to do. And I think that's what ultimately has to change.
100%. And that's where that self-discipline that we talked about knowing that if you want an organization that's truly high performing and has the capabilities for continuous improvement, that's not just residing with one or two people in the organization, but it's something that's happening every day at all the right levels, then we have to have that self-discipline to know, when are we the expert with the answer? Because all of us have, and especially leaders, have developed expertise in their field. And when is it your role to more set the direction and then provide the support for people to do the problem solving at the right level? And so I think that we can manage this tension between still being knowledgeable and someone who has expertise, but make sure you're functioning at the right level and you're solving problems that you have ownership for at your level of the organization. And we're actually be more effective in solving the real problems if leaders can have that self-discipline to step back and say, actually, is this mine to be doing, or is this my place to be supporting and coaching, as Michael was saying. So I totally agree, though. We have this conflict in our culture, and we need to flip that script a bit.
Hey, we have a question coming in from the audience, so I want to interrupt and make sure we address that. So the question is, how do you see AI impacting kaizen, problem solving, and learning? Do you have some thoughts on that? Let's start with you, Katie.
Well, I'm at a Lean Summit right now, and this has been a huge topic of conversation here today. And, we've always had times where there's increased automation or machines coming in and doing things in a different way. And we're at a change in time. I think now more than ever, we have to, as humans, get better about how are we framing the problem and how can we then leverage AI to help us, synthesize data and understand what's going on. But that's not going to remove the importance of going to see, and Michael, you can talk about this with your own eyes, really understanding how are we framing the problem that then AI can help us maybe have some understanding of, and then learning, how are we continuing to learn to integrate and leverage technology to make things faster and easier while still keeping that human touch and the human expertise in there. And we're ultimately still humans working together. And so it's about how are we having those human connections and having those, I don't like to use the word soft skills, but the human relational skills are going to be what's so critical for us to be developing as well.
Yeah,
are you hearing AI popping up in your conversations at the event you're at right now?
Yes, and actually one of the keynotes with John Shook on stage yesterday was about how is AI getting integrated? And so they did this interesting example of all these questions that were asked in advance of the summit, and it was overwhelming for them to think about how could they be answering them. And they used AI to say, well, can you synthesize the key themes out of these questions? And then it came up. And so it actually helped simplify and then they could be responding. And so using AI in that way as a leverage to synthesize information, collect it, well, then they still were able to, have their responses as well. So lots of talk about how do we use AI for good to make things faster and easier while still using the human framing of problems and integration into how we're going to then use that information and put it into place.
Okay, I see nodding from both John and Michael. So I'm going to, Michael, can you add to this discussion?
Yeah, well, I certainly agree with what Katie was talking about. I like to play with these things when they first come out. So I was an original subscriber to ChatGPT, and I know there's other ones, but I've been using that one to sort of stayed with it. But the way that I've seen people use this is Katie and John both like to talk about the importance of learning to ask good questions. In AI, it's extremely important that you ask it good questions. Right. So part of what you need to do is practice asking questions, to move you along the lines that you're researching. But simple way that you're looking at a problem that you're working on. you post a summary of here's the problem, here's what I'm working on, here's what it is I'm thinking about, what am I not thinking about, and see what it comes up with.
Yeah.
And so using that to complement or to enhance that idea of seeing things that I don't see, that I know we'll be talking about. Does it come up with something that I hadn't considered as we're doing this? I found it pretty valuable for doing that. And it's amazing in the last 6 months how much better it's become. It's, a year ago, it was okay, but it's getting extremely powerful with the feedback that you get on these things now. I'm amazed how good it is. I still don't totally trust it. There still could be hallucinations.
Right.
But it's a powerful complement, as Katie was talking about, to the human factor, and that combination of both of those, I think, can accelerate the process, and you end up with a better result.
John, your thoughts?
Yeah, what I would add is again, the objective should always be to get the people closest to the process engaged in problem solving, right? And not only to solve the big problems, but to solve ongoing day-to-day problems as they come up, so they can be dealt with quickly before too much damage is done to the overall operations. Well, if you think about it, most people who work on manufacturing systems are extremely knowledgeable as it relates to the equipment, to the product they're making, to the quality levels that they need to attain. But they may not have some of the analytical skills needed to sort through a bunch of data in order to be able to, know whether a process is in control or out of control, or if it's a special cause or a common cause type situation when there is a quality issue. And I think AI will be a great supplement to the people who are closest to the process, where they, I can envision a time when a group of shop floor employees comes together and says, oh, we've got this particular issue, and, punches that into the system, and it comes back and says, hey, these are the things you need to look for. Yeah. These are the problems and, the typical root causes we've experienced in the past. And all of a sudden, the analytical side of the work can be done much faster and right there closest to the process. Yeah. So you don't have to go up, a chain of command and get engineering involved or the quality people involved or whatever. Boom, it's done right there on the floor. Now, what that requires a leadership group that's comfortable with that kind of data being shared with the employees on the shop floor, and with that kind of technology being available to the workers on the shop floor. Because again, that might be viewed as a bit of a threat to some of the support folks in the organization. So again, I think there's a tremendous potential, if used correctly, to drive continuous improvement with AI.
Yeah, I would add to that. I don't think it's only fear about getting too much to the shop floor. I have heard and read, and you're hearing about cybersecurity threats. I think AI, whether companies want it in their organization at all, is still, in many ways outside of continuous improvement, still up for discussion. Just fear that, information is going to leak out of the organization altogether. But to your point, yeah, I agree. It sounds like there is a lot of opportunity when it gets to the continuous improvement aspect of manufacturing. So it will be interesting, to see where that goes.
Can you imagine being in an on the spot problem solving group session, and somebody says, maybe the temperature's been fluctuating a little too much on this particular part, and then going in saying, hey, do a quick analysis of the temperature as it's been performing for the last 6 weeks. And put that on a graph and put control limits on so we can see if it's in control or out of control. Boom. Right. And in a matter of seconds, there it is on the screen. And everybody be like, Wow.
Yeah.
This clearly shows we've got a problem with the
Yeah.
temperature.
And John, you're
Oh, that'd
highlighting.
be awesome.
And sorry, John, it's that you're highlighting what we, coming back full circle, it's knowing how to frame the problem and then the right questions to ask. And how are we leveraging AI to then do the analysis faster or synthesize information? But we still need to be framing it, asking the questions, and then leveraging it to solve the problems we need to. So I think that's where this human interaction is going to always be so important, and making sure that we're getting better at asking the right questions. And but how much better? I was thinking back to an example of I just watched Hidden Figures when, the IBM computer was coming out, and, people were hand doing all these calculations, and all of a sudden they were able to do it snap. And so it's the same thing, but we're just having to, it's speeding things up. We still have to be able to frame things, ask things, and apply them.
Yeah, that was a great movie, by the way.
It was.
For many reasons.
Yes, I saw it with my kids, so it was good.
So that's a very good conversation there. And I hope we answered your question in the audience. And it sounds like we could have a whole nother panel discussion simply on AI without, without advancing beyond that. So there's a lot to say, and there's a lot to still grow in that area. I do want to jump back. Speaking of the people component, I do want to jump back to Michael, because we have touched on a couple of components. Well, we've touched on how important the people aspect is, regardless of the technology. And, we hear a lot, and I'm sure the audience who are leading continuous improvement efforts, we do hear a lot about Gemba walks, and we hear about learning to see the invisible, a book that Michael has written. But I'm hoping, Michael, that you can, give us, I guess I would call it a thumbnail sketch on the Gemba walks, because I hear about them a lot. And again, kind of like kaizen, people know the word and they do it, but is it valuable? And it's valuable if it's done well. So can you maybe take a moment or two and talk about what that is and what some best practices around Gemba walks?
Sure. I wrote the book originally, all the way back in 2014, and I did an update to the Gemba Walk book when I realized it didn't really cover an office environment, because walking in an office, say software development firm, or a hospital where you don't have highly repetitive transactions, is very different from a factory. And then talking to a lot of people, I did yet another update and there's two really big new chapters. One in keeping your Gemba walks fresh, and so I think I'll talk to that aspect of it, and also then what should standard work look like for an outside executive when they come in to do a walk. So part of the challenge with Gemba walks is, why am I doing the Gemba walk? What's the purpose of this walk? The consultant came in, said we're supposed to be doing Gemba walks. We're supposed to go out. We're supposed to find all of this waste. Every time I go out and I find all this waste, I go back to my office and I've got more work to do. That's not how we should be doing these walks. But I think it's the way that a lot of people go about doing it. And so more and more, I'm really focusing on purpose. What's the purpose of why I am doing this? And just a real quick story. I was recently observing a highly competent leadership team doing a very good job of improvement. And they said, they're going to do a Gemba walk. And I said, well, this is really going to be fun. I'll observe it. Why are you doing it? And they said, well, we're doing this Gemba walk to show people we care. And I thought, outstanding. This is going to be like super to watch. How are they doing that? And so we go and they do their walk. When they started the walk from their previous walk, they had 15 things that needed to be fixed. They checked to see that they were fixed. Okay, that was good. They do their walk, and they're all done. And I'm just observing, so I'm not commenting what's going on. And so my comment at the end then was, I thought that you said that you were doing this walk to show people that you cared. And they said, well, we're focused on safety. It was largely a safety walk. And so when they did their walk, they found another 17 things that, no major problems, but little things that needed to be fixed. And so I said, well, I thought you told me the purpose is to show people that you cared, but you didn't talk to one operator while you were doing this walk. You did what I would call a safety inspection. And now there's another 17 items that the supervisor of this building, it's about 3,000 people in the organization overall, now need to go get fixed. He said, what you need to be looking at is how did your process allow that? Let's call it a defect. How did your process allow that safety issue to exist? And you've got to be talking to the people about, well, why didn't they see it? Why did they do something about it? You're doing this in a very positive, totally from the spirit of Katie's book of learning, to see what's going on. And then I'm developing the critical thinking skills of the people that are there in the plant. I'm respecting them for what it is they're doing. And then when I'm looking at the process from a leadership perspective, I'm taking responsibility. I mean, was there a safety defect because we've got new employees and it's an issue with the onboarding process, or was there a change in standard work, or just what is it that's not there? That whole idea of I got to do the purpose, and then I've got to find ways to challenge myself. Am I really accomplishing that purpose? And this is what we talked about a lot, because their purpose was, I found these 17 things and the 17 things got fixed. That was the metric. And I said, that's not your metric. Yes. I mean, your metric might be indirect if I want to show people we care. Your metric might be turnover. Your metric might be are people that are working in this particular building referring other people to come to work for the organization? I mean, what are things that it is that we could look at? The number of ideas that are being implemented, and sustained. There's a whole bunch of things that we could measure to show that I'm getting more passionate engagement of the people. And so going back and finding ways to challenge ourselves on, here's my purpose. Am I truly accomplishing that purpose? And a lot of times sharing, I think, with someone else, what you think your purpose is. And then saying, here's how I'm measuring our progress. Maybe I'm going to chat GPT and ask. Is this a good way to measure what it is that I'm trying to accomplish? And keep challenging yourself, because as you go through and do this, you can get more and more refined with the way that it is you're going about it. And that's how you keep moving up, I think, to higher and higher levels of effectiveness.
One of the other challenges, so I love that going back to purpose. That's so much of what we talk about. Go purpose and align your actions. I see too often leaders going on Gemba walks, going to the place the work happens, and then falling back to themselves being that going back to the beginning part of our conversation, being the one with all the answers, or suggesting all the things, like seeing all the things that are going wrong and their ideas for continuous improvement, rather than seeing what's their purpose in that moment, which is actually to help the organization or the people doing the work see those gaps and then do the problem solving. And that's actually what Jim Womack, when I just interviewed him on my podcast, Chain of Learning, was talking about. One of the big failure points of Lean over the last 40 years is leaders going to Gemba in the wrong way, and also then delegating kaizen or continuous improvement to everyone else, and not seeing it's something, either jumping in and solving all the problems or something that they're not involved with at all. So we have to strike that right balance.
Yeah. And again, if it's not done the right way, and this is why, Michael, your book is so critically important, because there is a right way and a wrong way to do a Gemba walk. If you do it the wrong way, it could actually be a huge negative with the organization. It's like, oh no, here comes those bosses again. They're going to come in and they're going to pretend like they care, but all they're going to do is point out all my problems and give me a whole bunch more work to do. And not give me any additional resources or ability to solve these problems. And I'm just going to feel a lot worse about the situation, versus truly coming in and saying, hey, we're here to help. What can we do to make your system perform better by giving you the resources, the time, the financial incentive to do the right things. What can we do different to help improve the process?
Yeah. I've been on a couple of Gemba walks when I visited various companies, and I have noticed what you said, John, but I've also noticed that, and I think this is, wouldn't surprise anybody. I have seen not so much concerned about they're just giving me more work. But there has been just a lack of trust that if I say something, it's going to get me in trouble. Not get me more work, but just get me in trouble. So it's just easier if I leave it in the hands of.
Don't highlight the problems, because.
Right. You just kind of want to keep your head down. It's like, oh, here come the bosses.
Right.
hopefully we can get through this without, some dagger being thrown
Right.
my way.
And that gets back to the self-discipline that leaders need to have of going to Gemba with purpose, of asking questions and showing that they care to help create that trust that it's okay to bring problems forward, or if things aren't on track, or things are imperfect, that they're there to not blame you, but actually support you in problem solving and thank you. As I talked, there's an amazing story of Mr. Yoshino when he first joined Toyota about not being blamed for a huge mistake. And when we can do that as leaders, have that self-discipline to hold back from that frustration, we then create a place that's going to foster continuous improvement, because we have to first make the invisible visible, right, Michael, before we have to know their problems to be able to then solve them.
Is there time for another short story, Jill?
I would say there's time for another short story, and then I'm going to have to wrap it up, but your short stories are very valuable, so please share.
So if anybody that's listening here, please type in the response to the question that I'm going to ask. And you guys can answer it as well. So you go to you go with your spouse, your significant other, or your kid to a big box store, a Walmart, Costco, whatever, and your partner gets out of the car, and they walk into one of those concrete blocks and stub their toe, and you look at your spouse, your partner, and you say, "Are you okay?" What's their response going to be?
Foot hurts, toe hurts.
Is you're going to say that? You're going to say that if your wife asks you, does your toe hurt? You're going to say, "My toe hurts." Most people would say, "I'm okay."
Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah, right.
Most people are going to say, "I'm all right." And you do that because you're embarrassed. You did something stupid. The last thing you want, especially if you're with your spouse, is support from your spouse, because you feel like an idiot and you just kind of want to wallow in your self-pity. So there's this element that we were talking about of trust that's there, but there's also this thing coming from us that we're reluctant to do it for a whole variety of reasons. I mean, trust could be one of those reasons within the organization. And so part of the challenge of being able to do this is I think people largely try to do the right thing. They're trying to do the right thing as they understand it. But to create this environment where we are building the trust, and I am willing to say, "Oh my God, my foot is killing me. I really hurt. I know I did something," as opposed to limping into the store and not saying anything. It takes effort. It takes intention. And so all of those things that John was expressing in his writing, that Katie's expressed in hers, it requires effort to be able to do this, to create space that people are comfortable enough saying, "Yes, my foot does hurt. Let me sit back down in the car seat for a moment, before we go in and do whatever."
Okay, any last words? I do have to wrap up.
Just remember that Kaizen's more than an event. It's the self-discipline to make change for the good each and every day.
I love the way you wrote that, Katie. I loved it. It was great.
Thanks, Michael.
So I have to say, I put a whole list together of things that I was prepared to ask you, and we just went through that 30 minutes much more quickly than I thought, which just leads me to believe another panel should be in the offing in the not too distant future. With that, I would like to thank you, Michael Brummer, for joining us. Katie Anderson, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule. John as well. I appreciate very much John Dyer joining us. And our audience, thank you very much. Thank you for the question. AI wasn't even on my radar to even talk about, so I appreciate that. And everybody have a great remainder of your day. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. Good to see you,
Thank
Michael
you.
and Don.
Yeah.